Thank you for stopping into Don't Walk Into Traffic, the podcast where we talk about what's happened, what's coming, and how we're getting through it. My name is Patty, and I'm here with my friend Jeremy. Jeremy, how are you?
Hey, Patty, I'm doing well. I hope you're doing the same. It is one of those Sunday mornings. I have the Sunday morning blahs a little bit, and I'm trying to pinpoint what it's on, and I think it's something I never thought that would come out of my mouth, which is I think I've watched too much basketball over the past 3 days. So I think I'm dealing with basketball fatigue.
Okay.
And also it's been really intense because I've watched most of the games with my mother, and I have decided that my mother is the biggest hater on the planet. And it takes a lot of, energy to keep up with her level of energy. The other night, we're doing the brackets, right? And she's going through her brackets as we're watching games. And she turned to me at one point and she said, I hate these guys. Why do I hate these guys? She has hate of certain teams on things. It could be that that team and they had a dad of a player once who was too cocky and he was annoying in the stands. And it just, it doesn't really end. So it's been very fun. And for those of us in Spokane, suffered a crushing loss last night, Gonzaga to the number one ranked Houston Cougars. And so, yeah, that's a full recap of why I assume that I'm tired today.
All right. Well, I'm tired because I didn't sleep, but that's fine. So, lots is going on again.
Yes.
Because things won't stop happening.
What would we do if they did anyway?
I don't know. We could talk about movies or TV shows or basketball. I'm not going to talk about basketball, but you could. Instead, here we are.
Okay.
There's a few things I think we kind of wanted to talk about this week, but we're going to do a little bit of playing by ear and see if we can cleverly transition from one topic to another.
Uh-oh.
And there was one you wanted to start out with, so go ahead.
It's funny because we had a plan last week and we went off the rails and all over the place. And so maybe this week will be a little bit more within the boundaries, not having a plan. One thing that came up a few days ago, I believe I saw it first on the 21st. We're recording this on the 23rd. There is a bill to repeal Section 230 of the Federal Communications Act that is masterminded by Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin. And it is essentially challenging the internet as we know it. Section 230 has been an important part of how we know the internet as it is. But in the specific time that we're in right now, it is amazing to me to see, again, Democrats, again, like the aforementioned Dick Durbin and Amy Klobuchar. Those are the two I'm going to point out specifically. Klobuchar actually tried to challenge this previously in 2021. And from reading Section 230 and seeing people within the tech industry talk about it, it seems like this is either just handing First Amendment rights to Donald Trump as he fights in court to repress other First Amendment rights that we are granted. And on top of it, I guess at the very, in some sort of best case scenario, I guess I could say, is that what this represents, this bill, is that we have leaders, specifically, I'm talking about the Democratic Party again, who at the very least, their crime here is a massive misunderstanding of what that bill actually is.
So their logic that Lindsey Graham is posing is basically that if they repeal 230, it would bring social media and media giants to Congress to kind of renegotiate terms.
Right.
But to me, when you have the owner of X doing all his garbage in the White House right now, and you have the owner of Meta donating billions of dollars into Trump's campaign and, being on stage at the inauguration, and Jeff Bezos and all of these people that have media companies seem suspect. You know that they don't want this because right now they get off scot-free for allowing whatever terrible things happen on their website.
Reading this story from Mike Manzik, it's in Tech Dirt. He's a tech reporter. He's also on the board of directors of Blue Sky. He does some really great work in regards to free speech and First Amendment rights. The bill proposed by Durbin and Graham is a plan to introduce a bill that would set the expiration date to be January 1st, 2027, says according to a congressional aide familiar with the bill's development. In this story, Manzik points out that in 2021, Amy Klobuchar introduced legislation to amend 230 in a way that would allow the Health and Human Services secretary to designate certain online content as health misinformation. So what that was obviously in response to was like kind of the, I'm assuming it's kind of like anti-vaccination propaganda that she was seeing online post-COVID. What Manzik writes here is consider what this would mean in practice. Today's Health and Human Services Secretary is Robert F. Kennedy, a man who believes the solution to measles is to have the more children die of measles. Under Klobuchar's proposal, he would literally have the power to declare pro-vaccine information as misinformation and force it off the internet. So you can see where this would be very problematic, right? Like it's the idea of trying to regulate from a federal standpoint what is accepted on the internet. And the internet, that would be what is accepted under any particular administration's viewpoint.
So it seems to me that because I, am enough of a former lib to understand where this rationale comes from. Social media is dangerous. It is destroying the next generation of human beings. It hurt my generation pretty substantially. Gen Z is cooked and Gen Alpha is just like done for. They're smoked out. So I understand the rationale. Like, no, we should not be able to feed our children misinformation online. It's not good for anybody, except so many people profit from spreading misinformation online that there's no way this goes through, and it isn't just a handover to the right.
Right.
I mean, because then all we have to do is declare that what Nick Fuentes says is correct and what Hassan Piker says is incorrect, and we're done. And then the government can just declare that to be so.
I think the bottom line is that he points out in here, and this is what I highlighted, is that he states, here's what repealing Section 230 would actually do. Remove the law that explicitly protects websites when they resist government pressure to censor speech. That's at the bottom line of all of this. So what he speculates is going on here is that this would end up being a legal battle in the courts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if like a website wanted to defend, and again, I'm pulling from this whole article, wanted to defend its right to keep content up or take it down, this is going to end up being a court case. Well, that would generally cost somewhere around $100,000. But as time goes on, you're looking at like millions of dollars in legal fees. So it creates a scenario where the only people who would be able to quote unquote be companies that allow quote unquote free speech would be like Meta or X, because all of the smaller media outlets would basically be put out of business. So it's not entirely shutting down the idea that you couldn't potentially through these legal battles have some sort of thing where like the largest companies, there's only just a few large companies that would be able to have user-based like social media platforms, because all the other ones would be basically legally suffocated out of existence. Long story short, repealing this would be a complete suffocation of independent websites. It's aimed less at the end user and more at the companies that provide forums in which users participate in.
So smooth transition. Number one, guys. So Texas is doing some stuff right now. And one of those things involves tech companies and civil liability. So as we all know, Texas hates women. Sorry, they do. A new set of bills trying to restrict the flow of abortion pills into the state and abortion seekers traveling out of the state are being brought to votes. The biggest thing that's kind of that they're trying to change is to target online abortion pill providers and the tech companies that host abortion related websites.
Hmm.
These bills would allow wrongful death lawsuits after an abortion and empower the Attorney General's office to more easily prosecute abortion offenses. It relies in large part on allowing private citizens to sue over violations of the law. This is the same way they passed the abortion ban in 2021, because it's not making it illegal. It's making it a civil offense where if you suspect that I had an abortion, you could sue me or sue my doctor. So then doctors are just like, no, I'm not going to do it.
It's like a legal bullying tactic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because just for the same thing we just talked about, there are so few people that can afford expensive legal battles.
Right.
It would also make it a felony, punishable by up to life in prison, to pay or reimburse the costs of an abortion for a direct hit on abortion funds. The basic idea is, and this relates to tech companies because let's say I am a Texan woman. I'm going to just kind of walk through the whole process here. And obviously, I can't get an abortion in the state of Texas, but I can in Illinois where my family is. So I'm going to fly to Illinois, but I don't have the money. So an abortion fund helps me do that. They send me that money via Venmo. I go to Illinois. I take an Uber from the airport to the doctor's office, have my procedure, take an Uber back home, fly back to Texas, all on money procured from an abortion fund. If that abortion fund messaged me on Twitter, you, as a Texas resident, could sue Twitter. You could sue Uber for driving me, and you could sue Venmo for allowing the financial transaction to take place.
This is insane.
It is insane.
Funny that you mentioned that. Now I immediately thought of this because in that story, there was an example they used of like, this would be the idea of being able to sue a cell phone provider for like criminal schemes that were discussed on a cell phone. Like AT&T could get sued for like two criminals talking about stealing a car.
Exactly. That's the exact same concept.
Ugh.
And not only that, my friends at the abortion fund that helped me pay for all this are now considered felons. They could be arrested for felonies and serve up to life sentences. So the problem is women were going out of state. Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24th of 2021. My birthday. Love that for us. And in that time, women rallied together. And so did the people who support women. And they raised a bunch of money and they came up with plans. And the women in Texas are still procuring abortions. So this is their way to stop them. So if you are trying to find an article on this story, it's kind of hard to do. If you look up Texas abortions or Texas abortion ban right now, you will find the story of two Latina midwives who were arrested for helping women procure abortions in the state. They were arrested several weeks ago, but they sat on the story until this bill started to worm its way through state Congress because people are so outraged about the midwives that they're not paying attention to this bill.
Interesting.
So
just real quick, who sat on it, do you think? Like how did it get sat on?
The government, the state government sat on, like, did not release arrest information. Like normally you can go and you can look up the police blotter in the newspaper or online. You can see who's being brought into jail. It was not released until several weeks later. So happy Women's History Month to me and all of us. Which means smooth transition number 2. Are you ready?
Wow. Yes. Look at how well this is going without a plan.
Listen, I'm going to let you think we didn't have a plan.
Okay, that's fair. I didn't have a plan.
So, in honor of Women's History Month, let's talk about men.
Oh, let's talk about men.
So, I've been poring over stuff for like the past week when we decided we wanted to talk about this after reading the article we'll bring up here in a second. I want to, for any of our male listeners or male sympathizing listeners, first of all, I will use the term men as a generalization here a lot because it's easier than saying right wing men or conservative men or dumb, stupid men, just men.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'll allow it as a man.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your permission. Um, so if as you're listening, you go, wow, I wonder if that applies to me, it probably doesn't. If you don't think it applies to you, it probably does. So just kind of keep that in your tank as we go. You sent me the article, so you go ahead and launch it.
So, where this originally started for me was a post from Michael Hobbs, who is a journalist. You can find him at Michael Hobbs on Blue Sky, Hobbes. And it simply was his post that said, "Oh God, shut up." And it was in response to this Atlantic article that said, "Democrats have a man problem." The subhead on that article, it's written by John Hendrickson at the Atlantic, said, "The quest to win back the men lost to MAGA opens a rift over class and gender that party leaders are struggling to close." So again, I'm reading this online as a reaction. I'm like, what is he telling people to shut up about? And he specifically highlights that this is after, I believe, I don't know if this whole quote was like from immediately after the congressional budget chaos of last week, but it showed up in my timeline at that. So I may be doing some false, I might have that wrong if this was right afterwards. But nonetheless, it said, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut also notes liberal squeamishness about masculine themes. He says the party is losing male voters in part because even talking about the need to improve the lives of men could run afoul of what he calls the word police on the left. And I also thought to myself, Jesus Christ, shut up.
Chris Murphy was just on The Daily Show last week, Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant performance, like absolutely stellar interview. And then to come back and read this shit.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about a whole lot of things, and we'll probably circle back a few times in this topic. But the Democrats should be campaigning to make everybody's life better.
Yes.
Everybody's. When did men become so special that they needed to be placated?
Well, and that's funny because that is exactly into what I found following, because there was like a series of posts. Timothy Burke wrote something about, show me one example. And this is legit. Show me one example of the word police in action. Just one. I thought that was pretty relevant. Like it's kind of, there's this kind of word police assumption that people have. And it's like, we're not talking about like slurs here. We're talking about a conversation about like gender roles. Like, where are the word police being used in general roles, like by liberals? I'm trying to figure this out. So then the author Philip does, he's a Washington Post columnist, and he wrote a book, but this is a chart from his book, and it's basically a chart that says the partisan gap within the baby boomer within the baby boom by gender. It goes back to around, let's see, what year does it start? It starts in 1994 and leads us up into 2020. And it's this graph that just shows this consistent up and down bumping of men gravitating towards the Republican Party. So to say that this is like, it's not even in good faith to say that what we're dealing with right now is a new problem. It's a consistent problem. And it's also goes to show that white men generally tend to be more Republican than women.
Well, and I mean, if you look at the chart that you provided, and we'll make sure we put that on the thread when we post next week, it starts with the civil rights movement and feminism, and like kind of your second wave 70s feminism. Because like at the same time that men started to vote for Republicans, women had to get jobs because life started being unaffordable.
Mm-hmm.
Women couldn't just stay at home and raise families anymore. And that made men mad because A, it made them feel insecure because sometimes they'd go get better jobs than their husbands had. But also, for 250 years in this country prior to that, men were taken care of by the women in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Men didn't marry for love, they married a new mother.
Yeah.
Who would cook for them and clean for them and raise their children. And when that started to be threatened, instead of the Democratic Party coming in and saying, listen, the reason this is because of Republican policy, they leaned in on the women, which is fine. But in doing so, they left open this big vacuum for the right to come in and say that men were miserable because of women, not because of the economy, not because of interest rates that were 25%, not because of salaries that were getting lower and pensions that were going away and unions that were falling apart, because of women. Women wanted to go back to work. Women wanted equality. And look how they're ruining your lives.
Mm-hmm.
The same with the civil rights movement. You know, now Black people are ruining their lives. So, of course, now that that's 2 generations deep, you have an entire industry based on telling men that the reason their life is bad is because of everyone else but themselves.
Right.
And because the Republican Party continues to spew that, men will continue to vote for them. Now you have the next generation of people, Gen Z, who voted in pretty substantial numbers for Donald Trump. And of course, 1 in 5 of them is unemployed.
Right.
So immigrants aren't taking their jobs, but it's real easy to tell them they are.
Yep.
And so now here we are, and we're stuck.
Every time this issue comes up, it's like the funniest thing to me is it's like, well, what'll solve this? This goes like into our conversation about the administration's approach to people with drug and alcohol addiction. Well, if you just put everybody to work,
right.
Solves all the problems. Can I just go on record right now and say that work for the sake of work has never made anybody more sane, more well-adjusted? You don't just go out and start spending a full day in the gravel pits and then suddenly your value within a family structure is improved.
Of course. But we have people who are paid to shout at men that they need to be alpha males and they need to not have feelings and they need to never be weak and never be vulnerable. And they need to go to the gravel pits and break stones all day, and that will fulfill them because that's what men are made to do. And then they're still unhappy. And if they're still unhappy after they've done all of these things that whatever Andrew Tate-esque du jour of the week has spouted to them, if they're still not happy, it must be someone else's fault.
Yeah, it's the idea that I'm doing the work, I'm not getting the result.
And meanwhile, it's just because we all have to work 30% harder. Most of us have second jobs just to get by. It has nothing to do with men versus women. It's the economy, bro.
I think that a big problem here, and this gets into a huge issue, so if you need to rein me back in, we can.
Go for it.
I want to rewind a little bit about what you mentioned about, like, if we look back several generations, I think you made the statement that, like, people didn't marry for love. And I'll challenge that a little bit because I think you're right in one way. I think people had an understanding that the partnership of marriage was a relationship that was born like almost kind of like
a business transaction,
a kind of like almost like a convenience. I hate to use that word because the gender roles were really specified.
Yeah.
It was understandable. Like, yes, I will go out. I'm thinking of my grandparents. Like, I will go out, run the farm, and we will have a huge family, and you will cook meals and take care of the kids. My grandpa had a huge respect for the role that my grandma played in the management of the farm.
I'm not saying that people never married for love. What I am saying is your grandmother couldn't have had a credit card.
Right.
So
That
if
is
she wanted to be able to do those things, she had to marry somebody.
total side note, but I was listening to this recording I made. I did an interview with my grandma in 2004. She passed away like 10 years after that. And the first question I asked her was, do you remember how grandpa proposed to you? And she was like, no.
Yeah.
She said he didn't get down on his knee or do anything romantic like that. We don't need that. So it is funny that you mentioned like, yeah, like there was an understanding, there was a role there, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a conversation about evolution in some ways.
Absolutely.
The roles have changed. And this is part of the problem when you have your entire ideology on make America great again, is that you catch people in this nostalgia for what it used to be like, even if they're not super racist or super sexist, but like maybe they're just indoctrinated by their dad or their brothers or whatnot on the idea of what it means to be a man. And it's not a modern concept of like growth that men need to make to have functional relationships in today's society.
So I don't disagree with that. I'm saying where the marketing has failed
Mm.
is not that. I mean, listen, at this point, I'm 40 years, I'll be 40 years old in 2 months. I'm ready to marry somebody and like give them my dog as a dowry. I'm done trying to look for love anymore.
Oh, come on,
That
Patty.
said, like two things happened. One, women were granted some bit of equality, not total, not even close. But I could go get a credit card. I could go open my own bank account. I could sign my own mortgage. I didn't need a man to provide these things for me anymore, which meant that men, if they wanted to be with a woman, had to earn that woman.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then also, for the past 50 years, wages have stayed stagnant while the cost of everything rose. And so you can't afford to have a single job household anymore. And I know some people can, good for you, not my point. In general, it is unaffordable to have only one person in a household working.
Mm-hmm.
And I can promise you that all of these trad wives on TikTok are not living on their husband's $48,000 a year job. They're not. So either they're already wealthy, which is normally what it is. They come from family wealth, which a lot of people don't have.
And they might be making $100,000 a year just being an influencer.
Ugh,
I mean, that's a reality.
that's a topic for another day.
I know. I'm just saying, like, I can only imagine the resentment some men might have for their wives being able to do that
Oh, yeah.
when they're making like $70,000 a year and their wives are making $125,000 a year.
And not having to go crack rocks.
Yeah, totally. And that's, I mean, I talked to somebody about this week who has experience in this. And yeah, it creates quite a dynamic, especially if you're dealing with a partner who is from traditional male stereotypical role indoctrination and their entire identity is shattered by the idea of simply they're not making as much as their partner.
Or that they're not making enough to support the traditional lifestyle that they want in the first place. It has nothing to do with their partner at that point. It's this idea that you either went to college or you went into a trade or like you did everything right. You did everything they told you to do. And you still can't have this quote unquote traditional lifestyle that you want because it's unattainable for you. But that isn't a gender issue. That is a class issue.
Yes.
And, you know, if there is one thing that I will, unfortunately, that I've got to hand it to the GOP for, it's that they are so freaking good at messaging.
Yeah, that's true.
If the Democrats could do half of that, like here I am trying not to cry, reading stories about women who are going to end up being killed for helping other women get an abortion. And men are sad because they have to work. Like,
It's confusing. I really don't know that they're sad because, okay, this is where we start getting into a little bit of like,
well, and that was a bad choice of words. I will admit on my part, that was not what I meant to say. That was a heated of the moment conversation.
What I think what you were getting at, and I had you all the way up until sad about to work is that this centers on psychologically, what we're talking about is very simply ego. It's ego. What I keep getting drawn back into is we're in a different time and men don't understand the ego has to be satisfied in some ways, but the ways that it used to be satisfied are not available. And so it causes like distress within them. This is the problem I have with all of this talk about work. Listen, I don't give a shit if you want to work your ass off. I keep myself really busy. I appreciate the value I have in working hard at something. But I understand that the growth, and again, I'm not 18 years old. And this is what I wanted to talk about with like the Dems having a men problem is that people my age who know younger men have a responsibility to explain what it means to be a man. And that is a failure of men my age. That's a failure of Gen X men.
Well, and it's not just Gen X. Men as a whole skew incredibly conservative.
Fair.
And that hasn't always been the case. That really ramped up in 2016. And because, again, we had the option for a populist, here I go, relitigating the 2016 election again.
Oh, my God.
We had a good populist message. The Democrats denied it. So Trump had a good populist message. His was racist and sexist, and he's a terrible person. But again, they're much better at messaging than we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like Gen X as a whole skewed much further to the right this past election.
Yes.
In fact, the only demographics that didn't were millennial women, Gen Z women, and women of color. Everyone else lurched to the right this year. Like I have to think there's people with some more sense than that, but maybe not.
Like this centers at the idea of like why DEI stuff was so like important to behind the scenes before Trump got elected, of like being the rollout plan, because this satisfies the need for white men to think that they're having a comeback.
Right.
Oh, look I'm so back. They took B. Arthur off the Department of Defense website. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, bro? Like, seriously.
Yeah, that's go ahead.
And so I think that we're getting into this larger topic. So I think what I was trying to get at is that there was another story. This one was in Vanity Fair, and it was like women, sex without women. And we don't want to get too far into that because it's a whole other wormhole. It talks a little bit about like a conversation Joe Rogan and Elon Musk had joking about having sex with robots. It leads deeper into the idea of like, what is porn doing to men? That could be 10 episodes. But there was a full quote in there, and I'm generalizing, but it basically said, this is a woman writing it, is saying that men don't want to go apple picking with women. And I read that and I went, I'd love to go apple picking with a woman. What the fuck are you talking about? So I think what I'm trying to say is that, no offense to this writer, but like there is an assumption in writing this piece also that there is some responsibility of men to figure out what the man problem is. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't, we don't need to be looking. I don't
disagree with you. If the entirety of the generations alive of men weren't broken.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is that,
like, if you're saying that men need to do some introspection and maybe go to therapy, that's different. But what you're saying, what it sounded like you were saying, I'm sorry, is that older men have a responsibility to younger men to teach them how to, quote, be a man.
Let me rephrase that.
And unfortunately, older men are dicks too.
But what I'm saying is that if you're an older man and these stories, like it did for me, really made me angry. It made me angry about the solutions that were being talked about. And the premise for an entire article was wrong, is that you have to look inside and say, why did that make me mad? Because I don't feel like any of the issues that are being talked about here are actual solutions to things that you could talk to younger men about what it actually means to be a man. Is the saying like, men would rather, I don't know, trim their toenails than go to therapy. Although, I don't know if that's true. I'd probably rather go to therapy than trim my toenails. I
Ew.
don't know. Who knows? Bad comparison. But the point is that, men would rather do this instead of going to therapy is like become a thing. And I don't disagree with that. But also, like, there's a very, very important point in my life that dealt probably more with like the death of my father, but it was kind of a deep reconciliation of okay, so long story short, I had to recently write a biography. It was about 30 pages. And I had to start from birth and go through my life. And it was centered around my struggles with alcohol. So pinpointing like when it first started, but it's not just like the events. It's not some sort of like glorious recollection of all the stupid shit I did. It's taking a look of how did these shape me and cause me to have like how much of an effect did this have on my defective character?
Okay.
And so I was doing this and I was like crying
Sure.
and I was having a really hard time and I was really distraught. So I called a friend of mine and he's a guy I deeply respect. I don't even need to go into it. Very, very, very good man. And I said, man, I'm working on this thing and I'm going through my life and some of the things I've done. And I feel like shit. And he said, good.
Yeah.
It's working.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. And that's the point. The conversation led to, what does it mean as a man to be whole? I would hope that men in general would like to think that they are whole, that they are a good man, that they are a good husband, a good brother, a good father. And I think we get a little bit off the beaten path here when we're looking at solutions like it is so often put out here like, well, don't talk about gender roles. Don't talk about your feelings. Make sure you message to people to talk about work. And the work thing just drives me nuts, and you'll see why. So what he said to me is there are like basically 4 concepts here. They're very simple. He said, as I was doing this, be capable of feeling everything. Search inside and ask, what is in here? Specifically, embrace what doesn't feel good. And this thing I will never get over. And he said, recognize men who are spiritually bypassing, AKA not doing any of the previous 3 things I just listed, by staying busy, AKA avoiding growth. These men cannot be trusted. Do not become one. And I think that was fundamentally one of the most important things I ever heard, because all of what I feel like we're talking about here is an inability to say to men, which is not what the Republican Party is saying. The Republican Party is saying, are you angry? Are you mad? You should be. Here's some more reasons why you should be more mad. The Democrats need to focus on this idea of, we are going to present things here that might challenge you. You need to look inside and express to people, a loved one, a friend, and talk about why these things make you uncomfortable. And that's where other men come in. There has to be some good men out there that have to be able to have conversations of being like, you're operating from a place of fear and you need to investigate why you have those fears. And those things might be like, I'm very uncomfortable that my wife makes more money than I do. And conversations might follow like, have you ever presented that to your wife? Like, let's do some actual fucking work here.
Okay.
Not digging the ditch, but do some actual work.
I understand that concept on a intimate level with men that I know, men that you know. That isn't scalable. You can't do that on a national level. But violence against women on a national level is up. Violence against trans people on a national level is up. I do agree that there is messaging to be had at this point. And I do think that there are possibilities as to how to welcome men back into the fold. Because here's the thing, it's not like we kicked men out.
No,
It's not like we as women or as queer people or as people of color or anything, we didn't say to white men, go fuck yourselves.
no.
We just wanted to sit at the table too. And they threw a big tantrum about it. And then men have never had to deal with their feelings on a grand scale. Yes, someone who goes through rehab or AA or something like that is doing emotional work that most men will never do.
Yes. But I will say, like, you went a little bit far there. Like, it's the idea of talking about the man problem, and it's certainly a part of the problem, but taking it all the way out to violence against women and trans people is a little bit outside. No, listen, it's a little bit further than like where I wanted. This is the beginning of a conversation needed to be had. I don't know that what I'm talking about is a solution. I would hope that it solves some of these problems. And I'm not, you looked astonished when I said that. I'm confused now.
Because I live in a world where I can't walk my dog at night.
Right.
And like, I live in that world because for as long as men have been men, they've never had to feel or deal with anything.
Right.
Women have done it for them, or they've drank it away, or done drugs, or cheated, or all of the things that men do instead of dealing with that women also do. But
Sure.
we also like know how to manage our emotions,
Okay.
and men don't. And when I don't
Right.
know how to manage my emotions, I cry in bed. When
Right.
men don't, women die.
Correct. But what you talked about and what this whole thing was about from the get-go was is that you said Republicans are really good at messaging, right? The only way to counteract the idea of self-victimization is to be like, bro, you're letting yourself be victimized. That's the conversation that has to happen.
Yes.
All of this, like that is like, you need to go at these things for people to be like, you know what? Like, that isn't true. You are making yourself, you know what men don't like to be called? Victims. Like, why don't you make people acknowledge the fact that they're being a victim? That your self obsession is allowing you to be self victimized, and thus it's dictating your behavior.
And
You are
I
being
need to, because it's getting loud, I've noticed. And so I want to step back for a second.
okay.
And
Sorry,
I
I
just
think I
want to say,
actually.
no, I love where this is going. I just want to say this is why I wanted to make that acknowledgement in the beginning of this conversation, because the way that I walk through the world and deal with men and their victimization and whatever is very different than yours.
Absolutely.
Because mine is fear. It isn't rational anymore. I cannot rationalize my way out of being assaulted.
No, I know that.
And I
I
know that
understand that.
men, yes, sure, there is an opportunity for one generation or two generations of men to like try and shake. But when I'm not saying that on a podcast, for too many women, that ship has sailed. There is no more having to placate or even consider the victimization of men because they have been victims of men.
I understand that entirely. The reason why men commit acts of violence, anger is a secondary anger, which leads to violence, is a secondary emotion to fear. And fear is the central core of what people end up being victimized by. And yes, it looks a lot different. I do not have to worry about walking down the street, and I acknowledge that totally. We have a man problem a men problem, I should say, in which their anger manifests itself in a way that physically harms other people. That is not a debate here.
And then like we tried to have we tried to have that reconciliation in this country, right? Like we had the Me Too movement, which was supposed to be, and Nobody in this country is capable of nuance, not a single human being. So, of course, yes, there are things that went too far. Me Too started out as the absolute perfect thing. It was exactly what we needed. It was a conversation. And then it was an irrational conversation because things have to get stretched. Everyone needs to have an opinion. Me too. I have a podcast about it. But like, I do think so much of what happened immediately after 2016, 2017 was backlash to that. Because for a second, I think it was working.
I agree.
I think that men had to take a step back and go, wait, do I make women feel this way?
Yes.
And then immediately, Donald Trump gets elected. And you have that new rise of right-wing media, whatever you want to call them, right-wing talking heads that have YouTube channels and podcasts and whatever, telling men, no, you don't need to do any introspection. Women are the problem.
No, I would totally agree. I think that what happened was both with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement kind of being within the same time frame. It was an growing and it was the general public consciousness awaking and vocalizing that the issues of patriarchy are deadly, and the issues of violence towards people of color and women needed to be acknowledged. And I think what the biggest thing I see is that the loudest voices on the right, the reason why they get so loud on that issue is because, well, it makes them uncomfortable, because it had to make them acknowledge that they have behaviors that are problematic. And you can either acknowledge that and say, I need to make a change, or you can do a full on assault at the concept of, I don't need to change.
There is a stand-up comedian. He's British. Was I right? Daniel Sloss.
Okay.
He goes viral on TikTok a lot, and it's always the same clip. I don't want to harp too much on the violence of this, because I understand, like we talk about, you brought up that Vanity Fair article where they were talking about like having sex with robots and whatever. And I do not want to reduce men to these walking sex fiends with no autonomy.
Right.
Because honestly, right now, as a woman, to have my autonomy taken from me it's shitty. But he talks a lot about, like, he has a female friend who was sexually assaulted by another person in his friend group.
Mm-hmm.
There's this, it's not just generational that men should hold each other accountable. Your friends, like 1 in 3 women is sexually assaulted within her lifetime, which means if there are a group of 5 guys sitting at a table, at least one of them's probably done something bad. But the other 4 are never going to hold him to account for it, because that's your buddy. He would never do something like that.
I've been in situations where I've lost friendships over stuff like that.
And good for you. I can tell you my personal experience is that's not how it works.
And again, I don't know why I brought that up, because we're talking about men generally, and your point is taken. It's true. Yeah.
Yes, I am. Again, I having to make another disclosure to make sure men don't feel bad. I know men will listen to this in my life. If you are a man in my life, believe me, I vetted you enough. It's fine. This does not apply to you. As someone who has also made the mistake of not vetting men properly before, or in a time when it wasn't possible to do so. Didn't have all that social media stalking when I was in college.
Right.
Like, I am to the point where I almost don't care. If it wasn't for the fact that the quote unquote male loneliness epidemic, or this inability for men to process any of their emotions, or these fears of men, were literally destroying my life and my livelihood and my country and my chance to own a home and my safety when I walk down the street. If that wasn't the case, I simply wouldn't care, because it's not like we did this to you. It's not like we all had a secret meeting and said, how can we make cis white men as miserable as possible? Y'all did it to yourselves because, Lord forbid, you don't have power. At the end of the day, it's the people who have power trying to convince the next generation of people that they need to also have power, but then denying it to them. And this is a world I don't know how to walk through. I don't know how to tell my sisters how to walk through it, except with pepper spray.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I know that's the extreme. But unfortunately, like, men, when they can't process their emotions, shoot up schools. They commit mass violence. They bomb things. When I'm having a bad day, I watch Law and Order with my dog,
Right.
who, knock on wood, has been very quiet this recording.
Yes.
He's going to bark in a minute.
What are you doing? Oh my God. Seriously.
Get over here.
This is not a bit. This is really happening.
That really happened. I jinxed it.
Oh,
Get
God.
over here.
Did you say his name?
No.
You just said dog.
You know what I think happened? I lightly knocked on the desk.
Oh, there you go. Maybe he just knows the word dog. Like last week, he really didn't like you saying the phrase dog whistle.
Get over here. Get over here. Lay down. Lay down. Yeah, you're a butthead. Oh, good. The good news is that derailed me from whatever I was on.
You were on a good one there. I was attentively listening, and this is kind of where we kind of put a cap on this one, because I think this conversation between you and I could literally go on for the entirety of the rest of the day.
Yeah. So my question is, do we smooth transition? Because this is actually a really good transition.
The dog barking?
No.
Oh, I would say the one thing on all of that, it's just, again, it's a statement of, like, you said something about like talking to your sister about carrying pepper spray.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm a man.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see women carrying that, my thought is smart. Okay. I can imagine a scenario where possibly a younger man might look at that and they're meeting a younger woman for the first time or something. And I'm using this as like a kind of like laboratory example, is that like they look at that and they feel something from it. They feel like, why is she carrying that? Does she think I'm a creep? Like that kind of stuff. And I think what I'm trying to say is, I can imagine a young man saying that if they're pumped through this kind of negative feedback loop of women don't trust men. And again, that would be valid, because women should have, you know, especially with strangers, should have some distrust. But like somehow if they're looking at that and viewing that, again, not in a nefarious way, but somehow that like gives them a feeling that they don't understand, that makes them uncomfortable. Because I think that's where a lot of these feelings originate from. And all I'm saying is that when young men are having feelings like that, that frankly are confusing, are not fully understanding of their relationship with women, or what's, you know, I guess what my point is saying is that I feel a responsibility that if somebody was to approach me and tell me that, I would ask them some simple questions. And the first one would be like, why do you feel that way? And trying to investigate the feelings that are being offered. I think men have done a disservice to other men in wanting to talk about the sports ball game, which I do. But like, men have become experts on surface level bullshit for a long time conversationally. And I think that's a huge failure of what's going on with men, because I think men feel like openness and vulnerability are really, really dangerous territories that they don't feel like they have any skills or abilities in, and that's a woman's thing. That is a human thing. Like, that messaging could be enormous for Democrats, of saying, if you're having problems as a young voter about things, and never mind, they're never going to say this, so fuck that. But like the idea of like, Men talking to men about their anger and, frankly, as I said before, like, what is the basis for their fears? Ask them to explain them.
Who? Who is asking this?
I'm
Who is
saying I'm telling other men to do this. I'm saying that we have a responsibility. If you're one of the men listening to this and you're nodding to yourself, yes, like, men need to be vulnerable. What I'm saying is that you have a responsibility if you become somebody who, like, you embrace the idea that challenging the fears and the things that are scary to you, they represent growth in your life. You might want to tell other men about that. Probably don't need to sit on that little trick you've discovered. I don't know why this is such a novel concept. I don't know why this is any different than necessarily being like, listen, girl, you need to carry pepper spray. Listen, man, you might need to, like, think about why these things are making you angry rather than just being angry.
the reason is because there's no accountability for the men who walk around angry and women die. And I know that's the dramatic version of it, but that's also what it is. Like, a man who doesn't process his feelings, or who can't process his feelings, or who hasn't been asked in time by another man to embrace processing his emotions and is violent, takes somebody's life. I'm sorry that for generations men have been told that having feelings is gay. But, like,
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that you tell men that that's not gay. Like, well, I don't understand what the push on this is. Is you're saying problem is that men aren't processing stuff and dealing with their emotions. And what I'm saying is that there is a role that men have with their friends and their other male counterparts to challenge them on the notions that these things are fucking important. I don't know why you're pushing back on this.
I'm not pushing back on that. There was something that you had said in that last run that, of course, now I don't remember. That was,
Well, I win then.
okay, cool.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, Patty.
Smooth transition numero 3. So our last little topic, and this is a very long topic, but we're going to try and just spitball some things because we don't need another 2-hour episode. You know, Republican messaging is damaging men. It's creating generations of male monsters. Fine. We know that. And we also know that Democrats are struggling with men, with Black men, with leftist voters, with Latinos. Like, Democrats are struggling almost universally right
Pretty
now.
much across the board, yes. The bingo card is almost full. It's almost blackout bingo.
Not great.
Yeah.
But for the first time in a while, I felt a little bit of hope for the Democrats reading something. So Dave Weigel had a conversation with former vice presidential candidate and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz while he was in Wisconsin. And Tim Walz has been one of the select few that's decided to get out on the road and talk to people. And Tim Walz, despite being, you know, what the extreme right wants him to, or thinks, Tim Walz is a man's man.
Yeah.
You know, he's a great dad. He's a hunter. He's was an athlete and a coach, and he's done great things for the state of Minnesota. And only the worst people in the world would disagree with that. So I don't like to hold that opinion very highly. So Dave Weigel asked Tim Walz the following question: how much can Democrats rebuild of what Trump is unbuilding right now? We've seen cases where employees are laid off, a court orders them back, but they're still laid off. Do Democrats run in 2028 on reestablishing it? And this was brilliant. Tim Walz's response: I use the analogy of a car running out of gas. Car runs out of gas, you go get a can, you pour some in, you start it up, and it's all fine. This is the car running out of oil, and it's broken. And what I'm saying is he is breaking it. This is a little bit in the Ezra Klein space. Democrats need to acknowledge that not all of these agencies work perfectly. All of us who teach would agree to that. We say how important the Department of Education is, how it does incredible work, but we would all argue there's ways that it could be better. I think we need to start messaging now. We need to put our experts on this. How will we build back next time? I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to create agencies the way we saw them in the first place, functioning better without all the barnacles. So Trump might be doing us a favor. He stripped it down. He blew the motor up. We're going to put a new motor in it and take off. And I think that's how we have to start thinking about it. And aside from handing it to Trump, because even sarcastically, we just don't do that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant response.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's a big coyote running through my backyard.
Cool.
Yeah, I sent that to you also, and I think maybe you had already read it. So I think it's interesting that it resounded with both of us about the same time we read it and didn't even have to talk about it. I said last week on the pod, like, that quote is when he is in Wisconsin doing town halls that the Republicans decided they're not going to do anymore. What I said last week, and I'll say again, is that Tim Walz is like going out there and doing what seems to be like really a very simple, smart approach to politicking in 2025.
Mm-hmm. He stripped it down.
Yeah. Focusing the message. This was all kind of framed around like, what do we need to get men to vote for Democrats? And we both said this from the get-go. Men traditionally don't vote Democrat, like historically. So like, why are we, it's always like trying to go at these issues that like are not focused on the problem at hand.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I had some hopeful things over the past couple days is that like, there's a clear within establishment Democrats, call them liberals. We've talked about how I feel like establishment Democrats are probably more centrist than actual Democrats. We talked about the Overton window with that last week. You mentioned that. And then, you take a look at this fight oligarchy campaign that Bernie Sanders and AOC are on, right? And like, these are people who I think would probably be the, quote unquote poster children of what like in, establishment liberal think tanks. These are the faces of leftists. And 2 days ago, they had 34,000 people at their Denver rally. And last night they had 20,000 plus in Tucson when they expected like 5,000.
Yeah.
That's undeniable proof to everyone. Whatever the Democratic Party is trying to do, it ain't working. And these responses, these different approaches, these very, very straightforward approaches of like AOC, like a clip of her just saying like healthcare, minimum wage, rights for people of color.
Yeah. All of the policies that the Democrats, like, granted, when the Democrats did have power, they didn't implement these policies, but they were at least the policies they fought for. And in the last election, no one talked about healthcare. No one talked about student loans. No one talked about civil rights and rights for trans people or anybody. It was abortion, which immediately when Roe was overturned, they had the House and the Senate. They could have done something about it and didn't because it's still their number one fundraising tactic. Sorry, I'm a little bitter.
Fair.
Like these are the policies that helped Democrats win for decades. And then, yeah, the next generation of people went like, wait, why are we still campaigning on this? Because you guys have been elected enough, like we should have fixed it, which is a whole different story. But I do think that people like AOC, I wouldn't say Tim Walz is a leftist.
I wouldn't either necessarily.
Yeah, I'm not implying that you did. I'm sorry.
I was saying maybe Bernie and AOC and this anti-oligarchy thing.
Yeah. And even like, I have a hard time calling AOC a leftist.
I do too, but again,
I think we could do a whole episode on how you should technically divide the left, but we're not going to do that today.
I don't think you and I are going to figure that out, to be quite honest.
Are you kidding me? Do you know how many times I've like written it down and been like, okay, this is how we should do it.
Okay.
I'm very bored.
Wow. I love that you're graphically charting out what qualifies the different political windows.
Because it bugs me. It bugs me when someone is like, oh, that's a leftist. And it's like, honey, no, that is like Republican decaf. Like, I need you to, just because someone might identify as a Democrat does not mean they're a leftist. In fact, if they identify as a Democrat, they probably aren't one.
Right.
We talked about, I think last episode we talked about it, and maybe even the one before, a good populist message that is simple and doesn't sound like you are trying to talk over people in some elite condescending tone is going to win an election. And hopefully it will inspire people to go protest. It will inspire people to talk to their Congress people. But that's it. Like, it shouldn't be complicated. And I feel like Chuck Schumer getting up on his podium and saying, well, we had to weigh out the cost of this and the cost of this. Bitch, no, you didn't. You took the coward's way out, and people responded in kind.
Yeah. Um, on that note of other things that really kind of blew my mind is reading this from a couple days ago. St. Patrick's Day was this week, and there was kind of the issue with the Drop Kick Murphys playing a show in Boston and kind of saying some rather unsavory things about the Trump administration. They had a show also in Florida where there was kind of like a guy in a MAGA hat, and the lead singer challenged him. Just a quick programming note here. When I listened back, I realized in the beginning of this I said hat, but it was actually shirt. So just wanted to let you know the gentleman was in a MAGA shirt, which I correct myself here in the second part, but it would be confusing if I did not add this note. Thank you. He made a friendly wager over whether his Make America Great Again shirt was actually made in America. And he gave him a Dropkick Murphy shirt instead and said it was probably made in America. The shirt was not. It was made in Nicaragua, which is classic.
Cool.
But the story is kind of like an interview with him. And I don't need to get into details of that, but somebody just kind of posted this and I was blown away. They just said, oh my God, he got class war into a headline. And the headline of the story is, "This is a class war. The Dropkick Murphys, Ken Casey on Trump, immigration, and Boston." Talk about like good messaging.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats will not do this because they hate that shit and their establishment. But I think probably one of the more uniting things that could be said is, this is a class war. Oh, why are they protesting Tesla dealerships? Class war.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a very good tent to put this under because I think that's what's going on.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, like, so much of this has been memeified in the past, like 5, 6 years, of like the whole concept of eating the rich. It's not about, it's a meme now, but it's actually incredibly important. The whole reason that saying exists is because they should be terrified of us.
They should. And, not to doomsday anything because we're heading towards the end here. I did some reading this week about like political revolutions. The French Revolution. Does anybody really want to go through a second version of the French Revolution? Probably not. Is it necessary? Maybe.
I know how to build a guillotine.
There we go. A better question would be, is there anything we can really do to avoid it if changes aren't made?
No, I think that ship sailed a long time ago.
I do too. And just to summarize that, so in France before the revolution, the wealthiest 10% of people own 90% of the wealth, the bottom 50% of people owning somewhere between 2 and 3%. America in 2025, top 10% owns 70% of the wealth, bottom 50% owns 2%.
Yep.
We are 20 percentage points off that wealth distribution. This is the, dare I say, blueprint for every political revolution we've seen over the past couple hundred years. Well, not everyone, but a majority. This is where the scales get, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're there.
People are getting more and more angry. There is some placating of people that can be done. Like, we're going to start importing eggs from Korea to drive egg prices down. Okay, whatever. I think people in power are looking for easy ways to soothe the masses. But there's going to come a point where, and I think we're going to hit another recession. There is a private equity bubble that's ready to burst to the tune of about 15% of our entire GDP. If that happens, I mean, we'll have bread lines. Like, it will be done. We'll be cooked.
There were some things that happened this past week with like Microsoft canceling like I can't remember the number, but like somewhere between 15 and $20 billion of a contract that involved, I believe it was CoreWeave, and their contract regarding AI. Apple also scrapped their AI programs because nobody liked the fucking AI they put on the new iPhone update.
Oh, people were mad. I was mad.
That did not take long, right? It was advertised like a couple, like maybe during I think it was advertised during the Super Bowl. And now,
Yeah, I think that update happened like 4 or 5 weeks ago.
yeah. So, I mean, like these are quick rejections of AI technology.
Well, what's scary is that means that what's happening are these companies and these politicians are doing that thing where they get their toe really close to the line and then you smack it and then they have to back up, right? But then they do it and eventually either you're not paying attention or you're like, you know what, I'm done fighting about this. Just go ahead. There is going to be some amount of exhaustion that's going to let these things happen.
Yes.
And that's only just because, I mean, things like that story in Texas has been going on for months, and I didn't know about it until earlier this week. And this is something I follow incredibly closely. If the Democrats want to start using this to their advantage and start setting up the messaging now, like our primary for governor is in 2 months in Ohio. And so, like, yeah, you know what? Tim Walz or Bernie Sanders should come here.
Right.
And everyone hates Ohio. No one comes here anymore. I don't get it. Like, not even our actual representatives come here anymore. Maybe I do get it. But like, this is the time, yes, to do it AOC and to do it. And I have to tell you, like, anytime I see a tweet from Barack Obama, I get like a visceral reaction. I'm so angry.
I just had that this morning. That's so funny that you say that. Are we talking about the same thing?
Maybe.
So today is like the anniversary of the affordable.
Oh no, it was when he posted about his bracket. Is when I was like, dude,
oh Jesus,
read the room.
All of the Obama tweets right now are like read the room, and I think the greater takeaway from that is that there is a duty as being elected to the highest office in this country, is that your job, yeah, sure it ends, but it never really ends.
No, that's why you have lifetime Secret Service protection.
Exactly. So like what are you doing in these times?
Make it as basketball brackets. Gotta
Sharing, you've got Drake in the Sweet 16, like
got a Netflix contract to deal with. Like,
it's insane.
But no, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because he was the change we can believe in candidate, and now he's like, fuck him. And that's what's really frustrating is like there are certain people that have just like this incredible control over the center left, and the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bidens. They all could get out there and start doing this, but they won't because, well, like I've said before in the past, oh, it wasn't on this podcast. It was on the infamous Outsider Social Club podcast where we talked about Jimmy Carter. I do not believe you can be the president of the United States and be an inherently good person.
You did say that.
I think you can do what you can to redeem yourself afterwards, like someone like Jimmy Carter. But I don't think the Obamas or the Clintons are doing a real good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that entirely.
And also, like, don't be afraid to be that voice in your community. If you're at the bar and you're hanging out with some people, you know, it's going to come up because it's all anyone talks about anymore. When they do, be like, man, I feel like we're all being pit against each other, but really what it should be is all of the people that have to work for a living versus the people that don't.
I saw a cartoon the other day and it was awesome. And it was like a crowd of people standing across a gulf of water, and the gulf said Gulf of America. And one side was informed voters and the other side was low information voters. And that really struck me because, as we have talked about on this, you and I are very online, probably above average informed.
Oh, for sure.
Just by even doing this podcast, but just generally speaking. But like, I'm seeing a wave of people kind of coming off how angry they were last week and in previous weeks of starting to realize that there's going to be a real importance right now of what you said is to having those conversations. Probably having those conversations with, like, obviously the greater motive is to make change, but going into the conversation and being like, let's let this conversation see where it goes and see what I can contribute to either informing this person or maybe even ultimately giving some things that might change their mind on some subjects.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen messaging like that for a long time. The work you can do is with the people around you. It's not like just going out and organizing in the community, but it's like literally having difficult conversations with each other.
And not even difficult conversations. Like,
not even difficult.
Just like, hey, did you see what Elon Musk did yesterday? Like, for example, hey, Jeremy, did you know that Elon Musk had access, unfettered access, he and his entire team, to all of our Social Security Administration data, which is not just our Social Security numbers, but all of our health administration information, as well as our banking information if we've ever received something from Social Security. So, and then they were lying and saying that 11-year-olds were receiving Social Security, which are survivor's benefits if you lose a parent before you're 18. But like, those are the, did you see what happened is the best way.
Yeah.
To be like,
like we're in a bar and then I'll be like, no, I didn't. Hang on a second. Bartender, can I have 164 chicken wings? What were you saying again? Like, you're totally right. I mean, one of the things that I think is, I truly see, like, as I, see people talking about stuff online, is that there is a lot of people who are really, really, really frustrated. But there's just also a lot of there's a lot of funny people in the world, and there's a lot of good communicators in the world. And it seems to me that there's a lot of people who are frustrated who are very good about communicating. And that is a skill.
Yeah.
That is a weapon. And being able to have these conversations, I didn't mean to imply they need to be difficult, but I think there also has to be kind of like some sort of fun or sense of humor or other things that keep people involved in conversation.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I'm going to pound this over your head until you get it. This can be kind of the long play on people. They're hearing these things from enough people that they respect and care about. It's something just might, break, change.
I certainly hope so.
Me too.
I think it's possible. Like, I cannot continue to live in a world like this if I do not believe that better things are possible. And so I am going to continue to believe that.
I agree. Me too. Hey, thank you for listening to the Don't Walk Into Traffic podcast. We are a podcast with new episodes each week. You can find us on social media channels at DWIT Pod, on Twitter/X, and on Blue Sky. You can also send us an email at dwitpod@gmail.com. You can check those social media channels for links to stories and articles that we referenced in the podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
listening to the Half-Ass Podcast Network. Did you know that?